Wonderful. So I know there might be still people coming into the room, but we might make a start. We do have a very full schedule today. So welcome to everyone in the room. We're really excited to have you a part of this meeting. It's going to be a really great meeting, and we've got lots of new faces and lots of returning members as well. So thank you so much for being with us today. For those who are new and just attending for the first time today, so REEN is co-convened by River Nile School, Foundation House and Refugee Education Australia, and it's really about bringing people together across the sector to connect and learn and work together to take action and also to centre lived experience. So thanks for being with us today. But before we get started, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all gathered and joining from today. And we acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nations people here today. This was and always will be Aboriginal land. So for those who are attending today for the first time, just to let you know that we have set up an introductions Padlet so people can introduce themselves, and it's a really great way to read about other members who have attended previous sessions as well. So you can find that link in the chats, and we welcome you to take a moment over the next 2 hours to learn a little bit about the members and also introduce yourself if you are new today. We're really excited about today's agenda with our focus on advocacy. And as you can see, we have quite a full 2 hours ahead. So we'll be doing our best to stick to strict timing so that we can maximise our time together today. We will be recording the session so that we can share it with those who are unable to attend today, and also gives people an opportunity to share the work that we're working on and encourage members to join as well. And so we do have some incredible staff from River Nile School and from Foundation House who are monitoring the chat. So please feel free to use the Q&A functions today and the chat room to ask any questions or engage in conversation. And we will do our best to answer any of those questions throughout the session, but if we can't answer them in the session, we'll make sure that we loop back in follow-up communications with our members list as well. So just for those who are new today again, as I mentioned, the network is co-convened by River Nile School, Foundation House and Refugee Education Australia. For those who don't know me, my name is Francine and I'm the Engagement Coordinator at River Nile School. And we're an independent senior secondary school empowering young women aged 15 to 24 from refugee and refugee-like backgrounds to access education and to thrive. So I'm just going to hand over to Sally from Refugee Education Australia to briefly introduce herself as well.
Yes, good morning everyone. Lovely to be in your digital presence this morning. I want to acknowledge that I'm joining from the unceded lands of the Awabakal people in Newcastle, New South Wales, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Refugee Education Australia is a national charity that has a kind of connective function between education and settlement. We are we were before a grassroots network, and I'll talk about that in terms of the advocacy in the next session. But our vision is to create or to sustain and support an education system that's inclusive and promotes refugee students to thrive and achieve their potential through school into post-compulsory pathways, but also with a view to enhancing resettlement outcomes and moving into meaningful employment. We have public goals up the wazoo, but our number one public goal is to develop resources and build connections to support students to make, agentic choices about their education access and engagement and career choices. So thanks, Fran.
Thanks, Sally. And I'll hand over to Maddie now, who's going to introduce herself and the work of Foundation House briefly, and also take us through some network updates and opportunities.
Thanks, Fran. Hi all, my name's Maddie from Foundation House. I'm a Senior School Support Officer here, looking after the space of policy and advocacy. As Fran mentioned, Foundation House is one of the partners for the Victorian REEN. Many of you might be familiar with us, but we're a community organisation that works across Victoria to advance the health, wellbeing and human rights of people from refugee backgrounds. My particular team is our education team. So we provide a whole range of services for schools across the state. We also have an early years component as well that works with early years services, which might be relevant for you in your contexts as well. We've talked a little bit about our work in previous network meetings, but we do have a whole range of free offerings, including professional learning, resources, our refugee education support program, and our multicultural education aid support network as well. As Fran mentioned, I'm also just going to share a few updates before we keep moving into, I guess, the content of our network meeting today. So we've really been listening to what you've been telling us as network members, and we want to find some more opportunities for you to be able to engage with each other and have conversations in between these quarterly network meetings. We have put together an online platform and we'll be sharing that with you very soon. As you can see, there's a little example on the screen of what that looks like, and thanks to Fran for her wonderful design work on this. It's a little bit squashed on the screen at the moment, but when we share it with you in real life, there'll be some various columns with our Padlet link so that you can get to know other members. There'll be the network meeting recordings. We'll also have a shared contact list, which is what, if you're interested, you can provide consent to be a part of, so that you can actually get to know people and liaise with them if it might be relevant in your work or the rest of your life outside of these network meetings. We plan to set up some working groups around particular interest topics so that you can progress with some advocacy and resource development and problem solving outside of these meetings as well. And we'll also have a place where you can plug resources that you'd like to share with the rest of the network too. This will be a password protected website, and we'll share it with you in the coming weeks after we've finalised who and what it will look like to have all your contact details available there too. Thanks, Fran. I might get you to move back to the last slide if that's okay. Just to share another couple of little advocacy opportunities. So usually we sort of spotlight any particular sort of formal submission opportunities that might be upcoming, either things that we as partners are contributing to and or that you might be interested in contributing to. We're a little bit late in sharing the work experience and other work-based learning consultation. That was an opportunity that was available between Feb and March, but just to flag that River Nile School and Foundation House were able to contribute to that consultation around what sorts of supports and tailored opportunities might be most relevant for young people from refugee backgrounds while they're at school to be able to gain some experience in different workplaces. In the future, we'll really be keen to have your input into our submissions, and that's why we're also sharing that survey with you so that we know which advocacy topics you're each really interested in, and then we can reach out to you individually for your feedback so that we can make sure we're representing your views and ideas and any challenges that you might be noticing as well. In the next couple of months, at least, Foundation House will be preparing a submission to the State Disability Plan and the Victorian Autism Plan. There's going to be a new plan that's launched in 2027 for the next 4 years. And we'll be sharing some insights about the intersection of disabilities as well as refugee backgrounds and what additional supports and considerations might be helpful for young people in school settings. I really encourage you, if that's something that is interesting for you in your work or the rest of your life, to consider participating in. There's a survey opportunity, there's an online consultation opportunity, and there's also an opportunity to write written submissions too, which is the form we'll be taking. If you flagged that you're interested in disability as an advocacy topic in that initial survey that we shared at the start of the meeting, then I will also reach out to you and see if you'd like to input into our submission. I might have a little online chat with the various people who are particularly interested in this topic area to let you know what some of our key messages will be and see if you want to share anything through our submission as well. And then just finally, there's also Engage Victoria's Victorian Multicultural Health Survey, which is open at the moment. That's open until, let me get my date correct, until the 31st of May. That's being run by the Department of Health to build a more culturally inclusive healthcare system. And it's available in about 14 languages, so it may be helpful to share with community members or clients or young people or families in your networks, or perhaps you might be interested in answering that yourself as well. It is a bit of a lengthy survey. It takes about 30 minutes to complete, so worth putting aside a little bit of time if that's going to be a priority for you. Thanks very much, Fran. I'll pass back to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Maddie. There's so much happening. I'm really excited to get everyone's topics of interest for advocacy so that we can get the network members involved in that. So as Maddie mentioned, we have been really listening to the feedback from previous meetings, and there was definitely a strong interest that's come through in the last two meetings around advocacy and collective impact. So today's meeting is centered on that. And we're really pleased to welcome Sally, who will be taking us through a really amazing session on mobilising change. So as Sally mentioned previously as well, Sally's work sits at the intersection of research, advocacy and practice, and today's session is about helping all of us expand our thinking about what advocacy is and the different roles that we all play in creating change. So I'm going to hand over to Sally. Thanks, Sally.
Thank you.
Sally.
Okay, well, what a great pleasure to speak about this. I'm a little nervous. I don't get nervous often, but I'm nervous because I know that there's lots of great advocates in the Zoom room here, and I want this to not be, the kind of the lecture sage on the stage model, but really to kind of use this as an opportunity for us all to think about what we do and what we know about advocacy, or mobilising for change, or its slightly more spicy sister of activism. And, there's a whole spectrum of ways that we might get engaged in what Fran really beautifully put there as collective impact. You wouldn't be in this call if you weren't interested in making a change, because while there are some excellent examples of ways that schools and other educational institutions and brilliant organisations like Foundation House are active and are working in this space, there are so many gaps when it comes to refugee education in particular, but we also know that we're sitting against an incredibly hyper-political, divisive kind of media landscape. The discourses are hostile and spiky. It's actually probably one of the most difficult times to have this conversation, but also one of the most necessary times to have this conversation about how we might come together, because the politics of knowledge and the politics of who can say what, about what, to whom, have become hyper polarized. Fran, I think I'm going to have to do a next slide, please, with you. So we wanted to have a kind of set the scene. We've got some great speakers today, and we wanted to set the scene by just kind of establishing some shared understandings of what we mean by mobilising for change or advocacy. The reason this is called Mobilising for Change is because as a national charity, as a public benevolent institution, when refugee education put in its application and we spoke about advocacy, which we used to speak about very loudly, very proudly when we were a grassroots network called Refugee Education Special Interest Group, the Australian Charities Commission said, no, you can't do advocacy as a public benevolent institution. And that's because a PBI has a remit to alleviate poverty. And the notion of advocacy, which can be slow, it can be the planting of a seed that you need to water over several weeks, months, years. The writing of submissions rarely leads to immediate action. That kind of the distance between what we might call advocacy, and we'll talk about the various ways that we can do advocacy, and the impact for a PBI at that level of alleviating poverty. And obviously education is a key way of alleviating poverty. Education is a source of hope. It's a social determinant of health. It's a protective factor. It's a route to social mobility. It's a route to self-determination, to independence and autonomy. It's, education, as we all know, otherwise we wouldn't be in this meeting, is a fundamental right. but the kind of link between advocacy and then that impact at the level of poverty is not a permitted activity. So mobilising for change is our preferred language. But of course, it's important that we're advocating, because if you can see an issue and if you feel that you have something to say, then that is at the heart of the collective action. Ideally, you're not doing it independently, but we can advocate as individuals. It's much more powerful, however, if we do it as not just in collectives, but also in coalitions of people who are working around shared values, shared ideas and values. So advocacy is really that struggle between ideas, often inscribed in policy or even in law, and the values that we might hold as individuals or community groups. Advocacy is the process of negotiation on how to advance these values, and there's loads of ways to do this. And I think maybe sometimes we think of the word advocacy and we think of it being, people going to Parliament House or joining a protest. But actually, there's a heap of ways that we can advocate, and we do it on the daily in our everyday practice. And as educators, it's arguably a fundamental part of our role. And advocacy is also then the process. So it's struggle, it's process, and it can be the product as well of how we facilitate the realization of these values or not. Advocacy or mobilizing for change or activism or collective impact can be fraught with disappointment because it's not always immediate. In fact, it's rarely immediate, the kind of realization of that alignment between our ideas and values. So advocacy activities include a heap of things, and fundamental to advocacy is this notion of educating. So if you have read the work or you've heard of the work of Paulo Freire, who is, of the kind of godfather of critical pedagogy, this notion of conscientization, raising awareness, is a fundamental part of advocacy. Doesn't mean you have to be hyper-political. It doesn't mean that you're trying to bring everyone on board into your line of thinking. That's not advocacy, that's co-opting. But the educating and raising awareness is a fundamental part of advocacy. Advocacy absolutely fundamentally needs us to build relationships, because if I have an idea and Maddie has an idea and we put them in independently, that's great. Sometimes politicians will count submissions, so it can be good to have individual submissions. But when it comes to the kinds of submissions that Maddie listed before, for example, the kind of consultations on disability and autism, the power of having a collective voice around a special interest group that you can really articulate your values and ideas is arguably more impactful than the kind of quantity of submissions that might go in. Sometimes you might take both approaches. You might go in as a coalition, but you might encourage members of your group, whether it's Refugee Education Australia or the Victorian REEN, or it might be within Foundation House or within River Nile schools. Sometimes it's useful to also encourage individual submissions, because we need to understand when we're advocating who we're advocating to and what the kinds of things are that they will listen to. Fundamental to advocacy is research, not necessarily academic research, but I know that there are some brilliant academic colleagues on the call here today, but knowing what we're talking about, being sure that we have the right fact base to be able to make the arguments, and not just going for hearts and minds. Hearts and minds can be a really useful and powerful way to approach this kind of space between values and ideas, but we need to make sure that we're grounding our arguments in research, because we need to understand that there'll be an oppositional view that doesn't want to change the things that we have in place. And so it is important that we understand, don't need to create the idea of it being a fight, but it can be quite useful to think about it in terms of your opposition and what they're going to come back at you with, so that if you're effectively wanting to make an argument, you need to understand what people will receive in terms of valued contributions and what their counter arguments might be. Organising and coalition building, as I said, is really useful. Now, that might be within a particular unit, it might be within a particular school, it might be within a bigger network, it might be across the state, it might be across a nation. And of course, we can see examples of international coalition movements. I was listening to the 7 a.m. podcast this morning about the flotilla. Now, I don't want to get into the politics, but the flotilla that's going to seeking to go and deliver aid in Gaza is an example of quite profound activism, but it is an international coalition. It's understood to be an international issue to try and get that aid across. So there's different scales that we can work out. Fundamental to advocacy is our communication. We may have lots of ways of doing that, and I'll come to talk about some of those in a minute. And we may want to lobby. So lobbyists also is a bit of a dirty word. I don't know if you've also recently heard the critique of the number of people with orange passes in Parliament House. So an orange pass is a lobby pass to get into Parliament House in Canberra. There are lots of refugee advocates who have orange passes. But there are also lots of people with a particular stake in, for example, the minerals lobby or the gambling lobby. And so that notion of lobbying often gets taken up with a notion of vested interests. And advocacy ultimately is a little bit about vested interests. And then it kind of creates a kind of good and bad piece. So we need to look at this with a bit of nuance and understand that we've all got invested interests. We've all got something that we want to achieve. Ideally, there's a negotiation of points, but I think the critique about the orange passes is that there is a number of people who are financially motivated rather than being values motivated to kind of push for a particular point or argument. So when we're talking about advocacy, obviously everything is underpinned by context. I say obviously, and that's because I'm a sociologist, but context is queen here. We absolutely have to understand what the political kind of messages are, and I'll talk a little bit about that when I talk about multiple streams. We need to understand what the policy is and what the politics are. They're not the same thing. Policy is the kind of inscription of values and ideas, and politics are the kind of discourses and the ideological leanings towards particular outcomes. Advocacy, absolutely at the heart of it, has to have a strategy. And one of the strategies of the REEN is to find out what your advocacy interests are and then to mobilise you along particular special interest groups. That's a very smart strategy. It's an effective and efficient strategy. And then there may be within that strategy more strategies about how you might be able to achieve a particular outcome for a particular goal. Next slide, please, Fran. So I'm going to talk about a couple of ideas in the advocacy literature. These are not comprehensive or exhaustive. So you might have others, and if you do, and you would like to do something similar on advocacy, a presentation of a particular approach to advocacy, we would love to hear from you. But I love this notion of street level bureaucrats. It's old, much older than me. So it really is an old argument from a sociologist called Lipsky from the late 60s. He was really thinking specifically about public policy and public servants. But this notion of street level bureaucrats is the idea that while and I'm thinking specifically about us as educators, while we may not be in, for example, Canberra or in the Department of Education, and even if you're in the Department of Education, you may not be at the level where you're making those policy decisions and working out systems and processes to enact a particular policy. Those of us who work at the chalk face or in a customer service interactive role, we are all the time directly interacting with policy and looking for ways that it can be flexibly used. I think this is fundamental to the role of an educator because there are bits in policy. There's a lot within policy that means that we can't do things directly, or there are things that haven't been thought out within policy that mean that we need to find go-arounds. I'm particularly minded of Foundation House giving an account recently in a meeting about having to find ways to support students or families who'd come through an emergency visa situation. So Ukrainian students, for example, where the conditions of that visa meant that they were blocked from being able to access schooling or particular components of their educational entitlement. And that, I believe, and Alison could speak to this, I'm sure, at length, involved a lot of back and forth with the department to kind of find those ways. That was realised in the classroom. It was realised in the reception or in the office where there were blocks because of a visa entitlement. It was realised in the classroom in terms of the ways that students were or were not able to interact with systems. And then it became an issue that Foundation House, as an organisation that works directly with schools through the Refugee Education Support Programme, were able then to directly advocate to the Department of Education, and I believe find some pretty good go-arounds. But go-arounds on their own are not the kind of end goal. The end goal would be to have that policy change, so that though that kind of effort, and it was a lot of effort, I understand. I'm looking at Alison's face here. And I'm sure there are other examples from your own context where you've had to do similar kinds of things to be able to find a kind of go around within a policy environment. That comes from that street level bureaucracy. So the idea ideally is that street level bureaucrats are listened to by the policy decision maker bureaucrats, through a process of an up and down cycle of information. That rarely happens without there being direct engagement through strategic advocacy with decision makers to make changes. So as a teacher, that's quite an extreme example. You might think of other examples in your classrooms of when you've been told to do something because that's policy, but actually it doesn't work in that particular moment or with that particular student or that particular class. And you have to kind of interact with the policy, interpret the policy, and find flexibilities, ideally in ways that are ethical, procedural, or leading to kind of procedural change, and often quite discretionary. So in this way, we are all real world policymakers through the ways that we engage with policy in our classrooms or in our practice. And that is an important kind of, what I particularly like about this idea from Lipsky is it reminds us all that we have quite significant agency within our contexts, because when policymakers are making policy at a distance, at a great physical distance, but also a kind of experiential distance from what it's like to do things on the ground, you have that kind of on the ground contextual knowledge that others don't. Ideally, as I said, there's a feedback loop so that this information from the ground is fed back. That, I think, is often where difficult bureaucracies like government or departments of education or universities or TAFEs or big institutions often don't have that great feedback loop in an authentic way. Next, Fran, please. So what conditions do we need then within that kind of notion? I think we can move on from this, Fran. We need lots of things. We definitely need trust. We need a kind of sense of what the policy is telling us. So we need to be fairly familiar with policy to be able to find the go-arounds and know that we're not completely breaching. We're not breaching a rule or breaching a law. We absolutely need relationship, shared mission, but we also need a bit of luck to be effective with our advocacy. Next one, please. And we need to have an eye on what's going on. So if we go back to that kind of initial multiple circles, there was the notion between policy and politics. And politics requires us to be really attuned to what's going on. It can be very difficult at a time like now, where it's the kind of most safe way for your mental safe might be to tune out from what's going on in the news. And I think this is where that coalition idea comes in. It would be great if we could take turns to listen to the news and kind of feedback in a kind of sensitive, trauma-informed way what's going on, because this is a particularly trauma-inducing moment of geopolitics, and the 24/7 window into the conflicts plural that are raging around the world can be difficult to tolerate. But if we have an eye on what's going on, and we have a kind of way of telling a problem, we can look out for a window. So what I really like about this notion of multiple streams analysis, which again is old, from a guy called Kingdon back in the 80s, is that it gives us a way of thinking about, or a way of kind of articulating how we are able to leverage particular moments. So you can have a sustained moment of advocacy. And I think about, for example, offshore detention and the violence of protracted displacement. There have been some recent windows. There is a window slightly open at the moment on that issue. And the ASRC and Refugee Council, and there was another organisation, and I apologise, I can't remember, were in a Senate inquiry yesterday talking about this because of a series of things that have got to a point where it's open. So this is a long, ongoing campaign against offshore detention and the vagaries of detention. What is important with multiple streams analysis is that you have a problem framing. It's very easy for us with a hearts and minds argument to say offshore detention and ongoing detention or the prohibition of people who have temporary protection being given permanent protection. There's a clear hearts and minds. It's violent and it's cruel and it's hostile. But we're coming up quite significant bipartisan support for this policy. So what this coalition of organisations have done is they've created some hearts and minds media over the period. And the most recent one is a beautiful story, a heartbreaking story of Aileen, who's a young woman who is, she was on Nauru and she's been here since a very young childhood and she's 17. She spoke really compellingly. She was a smart choice from the media advocacy perspective because she has such a clear Australian accent. She's relatable to a broader population of Australians who wouldn't automatically come to this issue with empathy and compassion. The policy window is there because there's an inquiry, so they've been able to leverage that by amplifying a media campaign, by speaking to the Senate, and ultimately they're trying to change the hearts and minds of politicians. I think this is going to keep going for a bit longer. I don't think we're going to see quite the same impact that we might do with a smaller ask, but it's a good example of having a problem, having a proposal, and waiting for the political events to open a window so that we can get in. Another example, which is a slightly more positive example, a much more positive example, is of the refugee student settlement pathway, which started, we welcomed 19 students at the beginning of last year. That happened because we had a policy proposal. We knew the problem was that Australia wasn't doing a program that had worked so well in Canada. We had a proposal to kind of mimic that program using similar structures. We'd done the research and we waited for the window. The window came with the then new Labor government 2 terms ago and Minister Giles being the immigration minister. We knew that he had gone to Canada and we heard that he was going to visit the university program there, the WUSC, World University Services Canada, and that was the window opening, and it closed quite quickly. It closed around budget time, but we were able to get in with a policy proposal, a solution. So we framed the problem, we had the solution, we had a coalition of actors, so lots of universities, we had Community Refugee Sponsorship Australia, REA were involved, Department of Home Affairs were kind of commissioned to do some co-design, and now we have a new program. So that's a good example of when the problem is framed, there's a solution or a policy proposal ready, and the window is open for a moment. You have to be attuned to what's going on, and that really does come from both, being aware of what's happening in the news or politically, but also being aware of what's happening in other spaces so that you can kind of leverage the moment. I think I'm going to run out of time, friends, so I might just move quickly on. And I might just go past this one. And I might just very quickly, I don't know why these ideas are all so old. They were all kind of written at a different time in the world, but they seem to kind of hold water. I really like Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, again, an old text. And this is probably on the other end of the spectrum. So there's lots of things that we can do. There's very light touch things that we can do, and I'll come to a slide in a moment. But Rules for Radicals is this idea about really needing to kind of maximize the transformation and go for a harder approach. So this might be within your toolbox. It might be something that you have as a kind of back end part of your strategy, like the kind of nuclear button. But I like some of these rules, and I've highlighted 3. Because they've really informed my advocacy as I've gone, as I've kind of developed. And I didn't set out to be an advocate, but I quite like it. I quite like it because I quite like a fight, but I also quite like it because I think that it's, this can be disheartening work. It's a difficult, hostile, discursive media space. And I think it's important for us to be able to see the wins so that we can be sustained and hopeful in the work that we do. So 3 of the rules that I think are really impactful is, I wouldn't say never go outside the expertise of your people, but you need to recognize what expertise you have within your people. And your people could be, your unit, your school, it could be your university, it could be your discipline, could be your community, your friendship group, whoever it is. A good tactic is one that people enjoy. So if you're raising awareness, if you want to just generally raise awareness, some great things to do are things like a pub quiz or a fundraiser dinner, or even a sausage sizzle at Bunnings. These are both ways to potentially raise money, but they're a good way of raising awareness of an issue, but in a way that people are enjoying themselves at the same time. So it doesn't feel like you're kind of really kind of moaning on about something, but you're more gentle in the way that you're doing it, and there is a level of enjoyment that connects in with the message for people, so that it kind of sticks. I really like another one, which is ridicule is the most potent weapon. I haven't highlighted that one there, but I really do like that one because it's very effective. So for a long time, Refugee Education Australia have had a database of scholarships. It's not really ridicule per se, but we do have a list of scholarships, and we do then have a list of universities that don't have scholarships. So it's kind of like a kind of it's an exposing device. It's a bit risky, but it has been quite effective. And certainly REEN is not solely responsible for the kind of expansion of asylum seeker scholarships across the country. But when we started, there was one, and there's now about 29, maybe 30, depending on the year. So certainly the kind of competitive dynamics are important. We understand that universities are super competitive, and if one Queensland university has a scholarship, that will encourage other Queensland universities to have scholarships, particularly in a city like Brisbane or in a city like Melbourne, where there is quite rife competition because there's a smaller pool of students potentially. Having that kind of name and shame list has been quite useful also, because certainly across the time and becoming a source of truth, the REEN scholarship page has been added to the Study Assist government page. So there's a kind of higher level of information, a higher level of exposure. Again, I don't know if it really is the thing that has led to the expansion of scholarships. Maybe it really has been a hearts and minds argument. But it's not unhelpful to have several tactics in your toolkit, and keep the pressure on, that consistency, not seeing it as a one-off. And that's what's so important about the Vic REEN, is that rather than this being a one-off conversation, it's a curated set of conversations to build and to kind of thicken our engagement together, not to drag you into advocacy, because you don't need to, but it gives us a stronger foundation of relationships and connections so that we can sustain the pressure. And maybe in the future, it might be that one of the partners says, actually, for us, we need to step back, and then another organisation might come in. So this is about sharing. I'm not saying that that's going to happen with Nile Forest Foundation House, but this is about the kind of sharing of responsibility and making sure that we are kind of looking after each other so that we don't hit that burnout point. And I have to say, massive kudos to Maddie and Fran and to the River Nile and Foundation House teams, because this is one of the best run coalitions of people coming together to talk about and potentially do some collective impact on refugee education that I've seen for a long time. I'll just go to the last slide, I think, Fran, please. So there's loads of things that you can do. You could contribute your name to a letter. The last one, sorry, one more, Fran. You could click an online petition. I certainly signed the ALIM petition. You might not want to do that as a member of the Department of Education or as a particularly member of a university. You might prefer to do that as a public individual. You could write a letter to your MP. I recently did that in Newcastle. We put together a template letter because we want to see more multicultural liaison officers in the police across the different LGAs around Newcastle where I live. We wrote a sample letter and we shared it out through the network. With the intention of multiple submissions from individuals as constituents to a local MP, because that's the kind of thing that they count. For a submission like the State Disability and Autism, a more effective message will be to do it as a collective or a coalition under an organisational auspice. But what can you do as educators in your daily practice? There's heaps you can do. I'm sure you're doing some of this already. But certainly, top of the list for daily practices is making sure that you're involving young people in decisions about their learning, that you're not taking a kind of patriarchal or matriarchal approach to assuming that you know what people want, to normalising and affirming multiple identities, certainly things like using names correctly, learning pronunciations of names, creating space for language, culture and faith. As a language teacher, I'd say go further and model plurilingualism, create translanguaging conditions in your classrooms. There was a beautiful presentation at the FAST conference just now about how translanguaging can really support resettlement. I'm looking again at Alison. I was unfortunately not in that session, but I heard about it. So people are talking about how valuable translanguaging can be to support refugee belonging and or certainly EALD, migrant refugee students belonging. Make sure that you don't assume people know what they're doing, so explain the systems clearly. And if you don't know the system, then learn the system so that you can help others to understand the system. At a team level, for example, we might do things like, be a champion for access and inclusion of refugee students in your school context. Make sure that you're someone in the room always saying, yeah, but what about language? Or, yeah, but what about, can we do this more regularly? Of course, we want you to embed, of course, we should all be embedding and evaluating trauma-informed and culturally responsive practice. And that's where in Victorian, there's so many experts in this space, particularly Foundation House, who have this remit and have this mandate to help with professional development around this. Maintain a regular spot in the calendar to talk about new arrivals. In New South Wales, school clusters have a regular refugee network meeting where they share data or not, obviously, aggregated data, not identifiable data, but so they're able to talk about patterns of new arrivals and where people are moving to and how things, kinds of strategies they might be able to use to leverage some funding to support excursions. Invite and pay refugee speakers to speak to your students regularly. I know we're going to hear from Lizzie and Sadiqa a bit later, not just once a year, right? This isn't just a kind of Harmony Week thing or a Refugee Week thing, but really kind of finding ways to amplify and bring in lived experience. Choose texts written by people with lived experience of forced migration or of migration. These are decisions you can make in your classroom somewhat. Of course, you're constrained by all sorts of things, but there are decisions you can make on the regular to really amplify issues. You can add your voice to special interests or campaigns. And obviously there's unions, there's Teachers for Refugees, there might be other groups that you're aware of. And if you are, let us know so we can amplify their messages too. And ultimately, being part of VicREEN is part of that systems or policy level kind of advocacy. And if you've got a kind of a position of relative power or influence, then use that in meetings and submissions, push for resource allocation where it matters, and keep building these cross-sector relationships. And a small plug, you can also become a member of Refugee Education Australia. You could become a member of Refugee Council. And I recently spoke with Tim Warwick from the Education Equity Alliance. They're doing some excellent work in Victoria that you might want to get involved in. You might know other things as well, and that's what we want to do, is be able to amplify those kind of connections, find points of fruitful overlap, connect colleagues together on those special interests. So again, thanks for completing the survey. It will really help us to tighten the ways that we can support you. Refugee Education Australia works at that national level, and one of the things that we're doing as part of our strategy is to set up these REENs across the country. So really super delighted to tell you that Queensland have now started. We've got a meeting this month with the ACT, so the EALD team in the directorate, it's not called the department, in ACT are involved. And New South Wales is a ... but I'm hoping that we'll be able to get something in the calendar for term 3. So this kind of national collection will help, those people in department positions to speak to each other, because they don't know each other across the country. They're not sharing practice. So the wonderful work of Victoria is not necessarily being heard about in Queensland, for example. And so that's part of our strategy to kind of advocate for greater connections, better resources, and mobilising for the positive change that we all want to see. I've gone over time. I'm sorry. 3 minutes, I think I went over.
No, all good. Sally, thank you. That was so great. And there's so much in there to digest and talk more about in the network, in future meetings and communication as well. And I hope that it's galvanized everyone in this space today to think about themselves as advocates and how we can come together. So we will, before we launch into our amazing lived experience panel, we might just give people a 2-minute opportunity to stretch their legs and grab a coffee and sink deep into some of the thoughts that Sally shared as well. So we will come back tight on 9:50. But yeah, just have a quick break and we'll see you back in a couple of minutes. So thanks everyone. I know that was a very, very short break, but we do want to make sure that we can make the most of the incredible next section and hear from the voices of Sadiqa and Lizzie. So we will make a start, and I'm really excited for the next session and particularly grounding our exploration of advocacy in lived experience. And we can't really talk about advocacy, and I know that Sally touched on this as well, without centering it on the voices of those who are impacted. And how we do that really matters through storytelling and lived experience engagement. Really needs to be ethical, respectful, and not extractive. And that's something that Lizzie and Sadiqa are doing incredible work in this space, particularly through the Refugee Stories for Change program as part of Refugee Council of Australia, and really supporting people to share their stories in ways that inform and influence and lead change as well. But before we introduce these amazing women formally and move into the panel conversation to hear more, I'm going to hand over to Sadiqa to share a little bit about the Stories of Change program through the Refugee Council of Australia.
Thank you, Francine, for having us. It's an absolute pleasure to be part of this network. Sally has delivered a very, very, very well done presentation for setting the base on how to mobilize change. And I can't agree more that she delivered a very great explanation and also talking about how to get there to complete the advocacy with all the steps she has provided. And I completely agree with her that raising awareness is a fundamental part of advocacy. In today's presentation, in today's meeting, I'll be representing Rukawa wearing 2 hats, one as a program coordinator of Refugee Stories for Change, another one as a refugee ambassador. But before I connect you with the Refugee Stories for Change program, allow me to pay my respect to the traditional owner of the land of Bonorong people. I'm joining from the Bonorong land, and pay my respect to their past, present, and emerging, and also acknowledge their ongoing contribution to the beautiful lands we're located. Moving to the next slide, Refugee Stories for Change is Refugee Council's community flagship program established back in 2014. We are a national refugee-led storytelling program connecting trained refugee ambassadors with communities across Australia. The program was born to create, with the main aim of creating social cohesion and community harmony and addressing negative perception about refugees and people seeking asylum. To the date, the program has delivered more than 663 sessions across the nation and outside Australia. The slide is a little bit blurred, but I'm sure maybe it's just on my end, Francine.
Sorry, Sadiqa. I think I'm just going to stop sharing for a second and just have a quick look. I think there might be an issue with the image loading, so it won't be
no worries, no worries. While Francine is taking care of the screen sharing, I'm going to take you through an impact collecting the data we have since 2014. Over these past 10 years, we have changed the perspective of over 88,000 people, trained more than 107 refugee speakers across the country, and delivered over 25 trainings to empower people with lived expertise. The program has developed a comprehensive resource kit for teachers, which is aligned with the Australian national curriculum. And we're also proud to launch the impact report of our program. It was back in 2025. In 2024, I'm so sorry. A link to the report and a resource kit will be provided to you later after this presentation in the chat box, and Francine can follow up sending that through email as well to you. And though the majority of our audience is young people at school, we've managed to reach over 212 local community, government, and government organizations. And as Sally mentioned, that we do need to extend the advocacy effort, the advocacy approach into different areas. So to further extend our advocacy approach in building inclusive workplaces, our refugee ambassadors have shared their expertise with the over 40 corporates organizations. And other than the engagements, delivering sessions to the school, to the different organization in various formats, that format includes online, in-person, and also pre-recorded sessions. We have also designed and facilitated classroom workshops, student leadership discussions, project research, panel discussions, and as well as teacher professional development sessions. While Francine is still working on the slides, now you might wonder, as people who are very dedicated about education, and education is a source of hope and also right for refugees, and not for refugees, for human beings. So if you're wondering that why schools and other educational institutes should engage with our program, here are some facts that I'm going to provide you. Well, there are plenty of benefits, starting from the program helps students to understand complex global issues through lived expertise and also creative storytelling, while also encouraging empathy, tolerance, and acceptance among the students. It provides teachers with real-life framework. Thank you, Francine. I think the screen is back. It provides teachers with a real-life framework for teaching about refugee experience and support curriculum areas in areas like migration, social justice, and human rights. At the same time, it promotes refugee leadership and representation in education spaces, reflecting the same very reason and principles we all got together in this Victorian network. Beyond the classroom, it fosters meaningful discussion about often about refugees within students, and later on it extends to families and wider communities by the word of mouth. And also the program's strength-based approach that empowers refugee students within the school, within the different education institutions. More importantly, the program is aligned with the Australian national curriculum, and very, very important, that's very close to my heart as well, it puts a human face on the story and creates that connection between the student and the speaker. And if we can move to the next slide, speaking of impact, 92% of students have reported increased understanding of forced displacement. And I'm very, very extremely pleased to share with you one feedback only, though we do receive thousands of feedback from students, from teachers, but here I call one for you. We all got so much out of this, teachers and the students alike. The kids still talk about it. The speaker not only told a powerful story, but managed the kids' feelings and reactions at the same time. This should be done in every single high school in Australia. Now, if you agree with that teacher's feedback, or if you're thinking, moving to the next slide, please, if you're thinking of collaborating with our program or hosting a speaker during Refugee Week, perhaps the slide that has all the contact details, Francie. If you're thinking of hosting a speaker, as Solly also highlighted, that it shouldn't be only throughout the Refugee Week or how many week, it can be any time in the year. Please get in touch with me. I have displayed the details on the screen, and later on I will put those details in the chat box and provide that one through email as well. And with this, I'm going to leave you on the capable of hands of Francie. And thank you so much for your attention. I'm looking forward to collaborate with you.
Thank you so much, Sadiqa, and for everyone's patience as well with the slides. And thanks so much for sharing more about that program. It's great to hear about the impact, but also really resonate with the importance of putting a human face to the story as well. And I'm really excited to hear a little bit more from both Sadiqa and Lizzie. But before we move into the questions for the panel, I just want to briefly introduce these amazing women to the room. So starting with Lizzie, who is a woman described as whimsical, wise, and courageous and one to watch. Lizzie brings a powerful combination of lived experience and deep thinking, working across data science, social impact and policy, with a real focus on systemic change. And her work is about bridging community and systems and creating pathways for young people, particularly from refugee backgrounds, to step into leadership. And as you've just heard, Sadiqa leads the Refugee Stories for Change, connecting lived experience speakers with communities across Australia and doing really important work with ethical storytelling and representation and drawing on her own experience of displacement. She's super passionate, as you can hear, about raising awareness of voices and untold stories. So I'm super excited to have you both here. Thank you so much for being a part of the panel. So I might start with a question for you, Lizzie. So can you share a moment when you really saw the impact of your story on others and what that meant for you?
Thanks, Fran, and everyone else for inviting us here this morning. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodian of the land, which I am seated, which is the Bunurong land, and pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. You know, that's a really good question. I thought about it for 2 nights. And to answer this, I thought of 4 years ago, while working at St. Francis Xavier College. I mentored 3 South Sudanese young women who were in year 12, who were on the brink of total disengagement from school. They rarely attended school and felt alienated from a system they believed already written them off. And my goal was to re-engage them back, back to school, to keep them in school and keep learning. Because I also saw how easily kids can fall under the cracks, and when they don't go to school, their chances of ending up in the system, in the justice system, it really increases. So I was really keen to try and keep them in school, and also to see if school wasn't for them, that there was another way to contribute and for them to find their path, if you will. And so I was sort of thinking TAFE or employment, but I knew that these were my ideas, and so I remembered when I was a young person, I didn't particularly like people telling me what to do with my life, and so I remembered it's probably best that I approach it with understanding them first and building trust and showing them that I truly had their best interests at heart. And the turning point came when I shared my own lived experience. Kids, when they see me, they don't know the journey I've gone through. They see this person who seems to have, ended up in this professional space and somehow different from them. And that's not the reality. I was once a young person who also had challenges navigating the system. I came as a teenager, had to learn English at the age of 15, ended up in year 9 with no prior education. So I understood, that school isn't easy, especially from a refugee background. And when I shared that, I really remember them looking at me differently. I think they realized, okay, she knows what's going on. She understands our struggle. And I didn't honestly share to be the hero. It wasn't about me.
Yes.
But I recognize the importance of mirroring, showing them that they too have the potential and the capacity, to make something of themselves, and for them to see that people don't end up in positions, people work their way. You work your way through things, and nothing is easy, but if it's important enough, you do put in effort. And I think for me, I was really trying to remind them that although school can be hard, they too can put in effort and come to school often, and maybe they will realize that there's something there for them. And that really did, it made the relationship honest. So I was no longer the adult in the room. I was no longer really someone who can relate to. know, and I think it's really important. And I saw that they started coming to school. They started to come, once a week, and that was a win. Seeing them once a week and being able to catch up and seeing where they're at and talking to them. And part of that also, a young student, one of the students opened up to me and let me know that they were faced with potential, and they were worried about that. And I remember sort of going to the school principal and saying, hey, I know that my role is restricted within school, but I see an opportunity here. Can I support this young person in court? And they were happy for me to step out and go to court with them. And I remember being at the court, and I remember that she was given an opportunity to just write a letter of apology. And I remember sort of explaining that you're not going to end up in jail. That if we can sit together, let's put this letter together and give that to the magistrate. They will know that you've thought about this and you don't want to go down that path. And I remember that changed, like her worldview, and she realized, okay, my future is not over, we can do this. And I remember sitting at, she was sitting across from me, and I said, you write the letter, I'm just going to read it. I didn't want her to feel like I'm the one who's going to be writing it. Just kind of giving back that agency, like sort of just being sort of just guiding her through it, but not being like, I've got the answers, I'm going to write it. And she wrote it, and I share this story because honestly it made me realize young people do have the strength. Sometimes they just need someone who's just going to sit there, who's going to listen, who's going to maybe reflect back what they're saying, not necessarily giving them all the answers, but just being like, you've got this. And this same young person, ended up finishing year 12. And I also leveraged my network, and I saw that, she was really engaged. She was so the two girls, so there were the three. So she was really engaged and started attending school more often. And I saw an opportunity, where I could, because I can see that she was a young person who.
I understand a little bit of Arabic, but I'm not fluent in Arabic. Okay. Yeah. Is anyone I could
Sorry.
Amara
Sorry, I think someone is unmuted. We'll just see if we can.
That's all right. Thanks. Yeah, and I'm also mindful of time. Do let me know if I'm bragging, dragging this on. But
no, it's such a perfect example. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's just to say, in the end, I leveraged my network. I got her to do a placement at Landers and Rogers Lawyers. I went with her the first week, and she completed the 2 weeks there, and it just gave her a different view. It made her realize there are so many opportunities out there, and that for some young people, certainly for myself when I was growing up, I didn't really know that I could be what I'm doing today. I think sometimes just giving young people the opportunity to envision themselves in various roles.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Lizzie. That was such a beautiful response, and I think it highlights a lot of the reason why we're all in the room today, and just the importance of connection and creating space, and just for those young people not feeling alone as well. That there's other people who might be able to share their experience and guide them. And so that's a really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Sadiqa, just building on that as well, I'm wondering from your perspective, what helps you feel genuinely respected in the same way that Lizzie and that young person, she helped that young person to feel respected and heard. For you, what makes you feel genuinely respected, heard, and ethically engaged when you're sharing your story with others?
Well, Lizzie just put it in a very, very base way possible. I can't think of any other words, like an example always helps. As someone who has been a refugee ambassador for over 3 years, I guess, yes. When it comes, to me, it comes down to intention, also to the trust and care how my story is held. When I go into room or when I present my story, I value when people approach my experience with curiosity rather than thinking with assumptions, curiosity of asking questions. That's why I mentioned connection with storytelling is very important. Storytelling is all about connection, human face, putting a human face on the story. And when they recognize that my story is not just, for something something to be consumed, but something it's very, very deeply personal, and a lot of people I mean, like, we're not different people. We're the same people. A lot of people can relate to some part of my story. And they understand that this story has been shaped by years of uncertainty when I was living in transit country, for example, Indonesia. And it has also throughout those years of uncertainty how my identity had to change. Not that I wanted my identity to be changed, but because of the circumstances, because of have to move, have to escape, this has changed a lot. And also when they're taking it in a responsible way. To me, being heard in very real sense means that there is active listening also involved, where people are present, where they engage with what I'm saying, and with the school students, they're very curious. And the innocent questions they ask, it really means that yes, the change can happen. Fundamental change can happen from very, very young age. And also, other thing that means having agency. Lizzie also shedded some light on that one. When I'm sharing my story and being asked for the consent, having clarity on how it will be used, knowing that it can, I can set boundaries, and also I have the decision to choose how much I'm going to share or how much I'm going to keep, because sometimes the storytelling can put people into a lot of traumas, exposing to traumas. And you asked about ethical engagement. For me, it's being in peace, that it contributes to something very meaningful, whether it starts with the greater awareness in a very small group, or positive change in a very big scale, or creating space for others with similar lived expertise. I feel most respected when my voice is not just tokenized, but valued as part of broader ongoing conversation about society that I care for. That society can start from very early age, as Refugees Stories for Change presents delivers session. For example, from prep, it goes to the high school, it goes to the other level. That's what I think about this question. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Sadiqa. And yeah, such an important point about not being tokenistic, but how do we actually involve, all of us have a responsibility to involve voices in that broader decision making as well. So thank you so much for sharing that, Sadiqa. Lizzie, from your experience, what does it actually look like when people with lived experience are trusted to lead and shape those decisions in the way that Sadiqa was just referring to, especially young people, like the ones that you were mentioned in your previous sharing?
Yeah, thanks, France. Again, another really good question. And, I think it's about moving from just having the person on the brochure to having people in rooms where decisions are being made. It's not about, again, to your point, it's not about tokenistic way of engaging people. It's about being honest. It's about being intentional. It's about knowing who is missing in the room.
Yeah.
In a simple way, to be honest.
Yeah. Thanks, Lizzie. I think Sally mentioned it in her talk as well, that really every one of us stopping and thinking, who is this designed for? Who's missing from the room in that decision making? So thanks for highlighting that again as well. A question for you, Sadiqa. So in your work, what have you seen work really well when it comes to creating real opportunities for people with lived experience to step into that leadership role?
That's a wonderful question, Francine. To me, it starts with recognizing that lived experience is expertise. Not only recognizing, but like we can start from recognizing, then accepting that lived experience is expertise. Well, it's not just a nice to have thing, but a form of knowledge that holds real value and should be treated as such. That's why we often refer our refugee ambassador as full of talent, as people not being judged for their past, but what they can offer for the future of our country, society. As a program coordinator, at the beginning I said I will be switching hats. What I have seen worked well is when organizations move beyond symbolic inclusions, not only in organizations, well, very small groups as well, and genuinely invest in lived expertise participation. That begins with valuing their time. Too often, people with lived experience are expected to share their very deeply personal insight on a voluntary basis. Sally highlighted that one at the beginning, while others are in the room paid for their time, for their contribution. Ethical practice means treating people fairly and professionally. By professionally, what I mean is being transparent about the expectations and designing opportunities that do not place, additional financial or sometimes emotional burden to the people who are navigating, displaced people who are already navigating realities, traumas of displacement, not exposing them to traumas back. And also, it looks like creating structured, supported pathways. It can start from pathways, educational pathways, anyway, into leadership rather than one-off engagement. And Lizzie was talking about this. It needs to be constant going on. It's not just one-off asking. It's like encouraging, having the, pushing for that person to really talk about, especially young people, to come out, to talk about their stories, to talk about what they want and pave the path for them. This includes, it's very simple, to be honest. The actions are very simple. It can start from some practices like mentorship, capacity building, and opportunities to co-design and lead initiatives, not just asking them for contribution and thanking them. When people are trusted with decision makings, we all can agree that it shouldn't be only storytelling role, but it's shifting the dynamic from small act of participation into leadership opportunities. And if I have time, another thing that stands out is Lizzie also talked about that it's care, flexibility, ethical engagement means sharing lived experience can constrain a person emotionally. So building a well-being support, approaching through trauma-informed practices, offering choice, and how and when, especially when people would like to engage, and respecting their boundaries is very, very critical. And I just want to conclude that what works well when organizations actively shift power, when they listen, not only listen and move to adapting and willing to lead, those willing to allow people to lead with lived expertise. That might mean starting from rethinking approaches or, even outcomes based on what lived expertise voices are saying.
Yeah, that's such a deep response, Sadiqa. Like there's so much in there and so many practical things that I think we can all do in the room to work towards that and that be a part of our practice as well. Thank you so much. My last question is for both of you, so I'm happy for whoever wants to popcorn first, but for this is, I guess a message for everyone in the room today listening to you both. What are some, and you've kind of touched on it already a little bit, but what are some simple but meaningful ways that people in the room can support refugee voices and leadership in their own communities?
All right, I'm happy to kick off, Sadiqa.
Thanks, Lizzie.
Sure. When you think of a refugee voice, do you see a story of trauma to be pitted, or do you see it as a source of data, information that's worth listening to, worth taking into consideration, worth following through, and I've shared my story, over a decade, and the experiences that stayed with me are the experiences where someone comes to me after my talk and shares something. And that's when I know that my story landed. It's not when someone comes and says, oh, that's terrible that this happened to you, because that's not my intention. Like I'm not, I want to share my story for the purposes of that story informing decision. If that makes sense. And I genuinely believe that refugees, when they share their stories, they're not looking for people to be patting them in the back. They're the most resilient folks, to be honest. They've gone through it. They're doing this work because they want to see some real impact. So I just wanted to put it out there. What are you thinking about when you want to engage refugees? What is the goal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Lizzie. I think that really resonates. Working in River Nile School, our girls are fierce and have such deep thoughts to share, and that really resonated. Thanks, Lizzie. A really good thing for everyone to be thinking about. Yeah.
Thank you.
How about you, Sadiqa?
Lizzie put it in a very comprehensive way of like how it can the support look like. It shouldn't be always tapping on the shoulder that yes, your story is very strong, powerful, inspiring. But other than that, there are very, very simple act that everybody in everyday life, Sally mentioned that what you can do in everyday life and wherever you're working. It's like very, very, very simple, starting from raising awareness, education, learning about what's happening, and advocacy, and also services that you can provide. And it is too often when I receive the feedback from the school, the feedbacks are very powerful. It's like when I mentioned that it's starting from talking about that story, because how the program, when once the story is delivered, how it passes by from the students to the parents, from parents to the friends of parents, and then it spreads in the community, word of mouth, how what you learn, how you can reflect back on that one. And in terms of like thinking out of like, everyday life, I have everybody's like very, very busy, I do understand, but like what we can do beyond this, like with advocacy, and how we can, think about advocacy. And also it is valuing, to me it's also valuing the lived experience as expertise, as I mentioned. This means that right now in this network that we're sitting here, this means like we can advocate within our own spaces for people with lived expertise, that they needed to be credited and included in the decision making process. It's like it starts with small acts of recommending a speaker, for example, or pushing, not pushing, really like working towards hosting somebody to come and speak. And building paid engagements can be another way of supporting, ensuring diverse representations in the panel, for example, for small groups, advisory groups. These choices really, really matters. And it's also about how you listen, consume the information, and how you learn and how you reflect, as I said. Take the time to engage deeply. That's what I think. Reflect on what you hear, and very importantly, sometimes be open in some stuff that you need to unlearn. And supporting refugee leadership means recognizing that people are not just sharing stories when they are in the room, but offering insights that can shape, as I mentioned, not judging people, like not having a picture of like refugees from the past, but what they can offer us for moving forward. And finally, use your influence. And if you are in a very small group, however it's big or small, to open the doors. That might look like, connecting a refugee person, leader, to leadership opportunities, amplifying their work that they do, or advocating for more inclusive practices within the organization and or the small network you have.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much you have given so much today and been so generous with your thinking and your time, and we're really grateful. I wish that we had more time to ask more questions and hear more from you, but we're really grateful. And if you are, for everyone here today, if you are interested to hear more from Lizzie and Sadiqa, we will share details about the program. There are ways to be able to, include them in the room that you are in as well. So, and just a reminder to those as people as well that we are, that Refugee Week is coming up. But as we've spoken about through this panel, hopefully that it's not just about engaging speakers for Refugee Week, but also thinking about what spaces you're creating and what seats at the table for that broader decision making as well, but using these opportunities to hear from incredible people like Sadiqa and Lizzie to really like inform that broader decision making as well. So thank you so much, Lizzie and Sadiqa. It's been a joy to have you today. So I am now going to, sorry, I'm just,
Fran, I think I'm introducing networking rooms.
Awesome. Yeah,
Are you
thanks,
happy for me
Maggie.
to jump in?
Yeah,
Lovely.
please go for it. Sorry, I know we're a little bit over time,
That's
but thanks,
perfectly
Maggie.
okay.
Yeah.
Hello again, everyone. We wanted to provide some space for us to chat about, I guess, how we're going with the content from throughout the meeting. As usual, we've had so many incredible speakers that we are a little bit behind time. So we do have a little bit less time than usual to chat in breakout rooms. Hoping that's okay because we're going to follow up with our shared contact lists that many of you will have provided your consent to be a part of, and hopefully some follow-up opportunities for you to be able to connect with each other outside of this network itself. So we're just going to take 10 minutes in breakout rooms today because we do have some wonderful other guest speakers to welcome in a moment as well. There's some guide questions on the screen and we'll pop them in the chat as well. But just given how many incredible speakers we've had so far, you might just like to take it as an opportunity to just share sort of where your thinking and feeling is at the moment. So I'll just open the breakout rooms. We'll also pop a Padlet into the link and you can add any reflective thoughts that you might have because we won't necessarily have the time to come back together and share, but we'll definitely look at any thoughts that you do share from your breakout rooms on the Padlet and we'll build that into our future meeting planning as well.
Yeah, so thanks everyone. I'm sorry that you only got a short amount of time in the breakout rooms, but hopefully you got to have a good chat in those 10 minutes and really think about some of the things and your feelings towards what we've heard today. I'm really, really excited. Also, don't forget to add, if you do have any thoughts that were discussed in your group, to add them to the Padlets from the breakout rooms. The link is in the chat as well. So we're really excited for our next session, and we've got the incredible Braybrook College Power Collective joining us. And the Power Collective is a space that really embodies that youth-led advocacy and what it can look like in practice. So what started as a space for students from diverse backgrounds to come together has grown into a really strong platform for student voice, leadership and action, and really shaping conversations, leading anti-racism education and influencing their school, and building a real sense of belonging as well. So I had the privilege of visiting the collective last term with our student leader, Yusra, and honestly being in that room and hearing their ideas and their passion and the way they back each other was really, really powerful and very much stayed with me. So I'm really excited to hand over to the Braybrook College and directly. Just going to hand over back to Maddie, who's going to share some available advocacy supports and resources and to wrap us up for today.
Thanks, Pram. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Sorry, team, one moment. Hopefully you can see my screen now. Thank you once again to the wonderful Power Collective group. So exciting and energizing to be able to hear from you all. And we really hope it can give other schools great ideas and community agencies about the type of groups and work that you can do, really centering the voices of your young people as well. I'm given the very difficult task of summarising, I guess, an incredible meeting today and wrapping it up in a few minutes. So I'm just going to touch on a few key takeaways. Sorry, the formatting changed a little bit here. Apologies, but hopefully you can still read it okay. I really just want to remind everyone of some of the key messages that you all have such power and influence as the individuals that you are and the various different communities that you sit in. This has been a meeting focused on how we can influence change, both as individuals, in our schools, in our agencies, and in the broader community, and then at the policy and society levels as well. And already we've heard an incredible array of examples of how you can do that on the day-to-day basis in the interactions that you have with another teacher, with a young person, or on the broader sort of policy level basis in how you report to the Department of Education around incidents of racism, how you contribute to a submission around disability and autism supports for young people from refugee backgrounds. So hopefully it's given you lots of really tangible ideas about what you can do next. And also just to remind us that we're doing this together. This has been a real emphasis for us throughout REEN, that we are all really change makers as individuals, but together we're trying to influence change on national and even international levels as well. So we do have our theory of change, which you can come back to if you want to be reminded of what you're contributing to on a broader scale. We'll pop the link in the chat so that you can read it in more detail. But just to remind you that there's going to be opportunities for you to connect with each other and keep doing some of this work alongside each other outside of our quarterly meetings as well. There's lots of other people outside the network that can support you as well. Certainly within your schools, some of your key allies are most likely your principals and other members of leadership, most likely your wellbeing team, your EAL team. Lots of community agencies are available to support you in asking for change and influencing change. Foundation House is just one of those, which really specialises in supporting young people and families from refugee backgrounds. But we're fortunate to have a range of other agencies on the call with us today that you can connect with. At Foundation House, we have a team of school support officers that are specifically available to be able to provide on the ground and systems level consultation for you in your roles as school staff members, and we'll provide some contact details for you afterwards. And then also just to remind you that as educators, you have various different education authorities and people in dedicated roles who can support you in your work too, who you can escalate concerns, problem solve issues, let them know about patterns that you're noticing or where maybe a particular policy isn't really aligning with the challenges that you might be facing on the ground. I won't go into the details here because I know that the various roles differ depending on what sort of school you are, but we will be sharing the slides afterwards so that you can have a little bit more of a look. In terms of Foundation House's team, you've possibly connected with many of us already. As you know, my name's Maddie and I'm one of our senior school support officers looking at policy and advocacy. So when there's really big systems level challenges that you might be facing as school staff, you're welcome to get in contact with me. We also have a senior professional learning officer, Lindsay, who's available for professional learning both in your school as well as a range of calendar online professional learning sessions. We have an MEA support officer, Afnan, who's specifically available for schools and MEAs or bicultural workers to support you in resourcing and networking and professional learning so that you can do your work in a way that's really trauma-informed and really inclusive. And then we have a whole team of regional staff members who are called our school support officers. And you can get in contact with our general team email and I'll put you in contact with the most appropriate one that can help you on the ground to connect you with resources, learning, relevant programs, and day-to-day consultation as well. So just to wrap us up, we have another couple of meetings left for the year. We'll be really excited to see you back in term 3. We'll do a little bit more careful planning about how much is actually possible for us to cover in a network meeting, knowing that we did have to cut a few things short today. But we'll make sure to look over your feedback and you're welcome to get back in contact with us if there's anything else in particular that you wanted to recommend or suggest for our next meeting. The term 3 meeting will be on the 30th of July, and as usual, that will be a 9 till 11 a.m. time slot online. We'll be sharing the registration link with you soon. Really exciting to announce that our term 4 meeting will actually be an in-person meeting. That will most likely be at Nile School in North Melbourne area, in the centre of Melbourne. We'll be sharing some more information with you soon about how you can register for that. And we're looking to have that in an afternoon time slot as well. So just to flag that at the moment so that you might be able to put it aside in your calendars.